A young woman left the hotel and disappeared without a trace. She just needed to walk along the straight road from the city center, but it was as if she vanished into thin air. When the police started searching for her, they encountered numerous alarming discoveries, unexpected twists, and strange events. For several years, this case remained one of the most mysterious disappearances, but eventually, the unexpected truth was revealed. Brittanee Drexel was born on October 7, 1991, in Rochester, New York. Her parents, Chad Drexel and Dawn Pierman, divorced shortly after her birth, and most of Brittanee's childhood was spent with her mother and stepfather, Chad. Later, the couple had a second daughter, whom they named Marissa. The family's life was full of relocations due to Chad's military service. Each new place became a temporary home for them until they settled in the picturesque suburb of Rochester called Chile when Chad completed his military career. Brittanee, the eldest daughter, faced a serious problem from an early age. She was diagnosed with a rare disease of her right eye. Her parents did not lose hope and consulted the best specialists. The girl underwent numerous complex surgeries in an attempt to save her vision, but unfortunately, the disease proved insurmountable, and her right eye became completely blind. To conceal the visible defect, Brittanee began wearing special contact lenses. These lenses helped her feel more confident among her peers. Despite all the medical challenges, her spirit remained unshakable. Brittanee grew up as a cheerful and energetic girl. She quickly made friends who appreciated her kindness and openness. The girl loved spending time outdoors, enjoying the fresh air and active games. Sports became an integral part of her life, helping her feel strong and independent. Brittanee did not let her condition become an obstacle to happiness. She accepted life as it was and tried to squeeze the most joy out of every day. Every moment of her life was filled with laughter, friendship, and small victories over herself. Her story became an example of courage and resilience for everyone who knew her. From a very young age, Brittanee was a very active and cheerful girl. The house was always noisy and fun because Brittanee loved inviting friends and hosting small parties. Dawn, her mother, worked as a nurse and often took night shifts to spend more time with the children during the day. Brittanee was passionate about sports from childhood. She started playing soccer at the age of 5 and quickly became one of the best on her team. Her talent was noticed by coaches, and by the age of 12, she was already playing for the school team at a level that allowed her to hope for a sports scholarship in the future. Besides soccer, Brittanee also had a passion for fashion. She loved experimenting with different clothing styles, doing hairstyles, and often participated in school fashion shows. Her friends frequently recalled how she helped them pick out outfits and always knew what would be fashionable in the next season. At school, Brittanee was a popular and sociable girl. She made friends easily and was always the center of attention. Teachers described her as a responsible and hardworking student who always tried to complete her homework on time and helped her classmates. However, behind the image of a successful and cheerful girl, there were also difficulties. Since Brittanee's parents divorced when she was very young, this fact left a mark on her soul. She often felt torn between two worlds and tried to find her own path that would make her feel whole. Adolescence proved to be challenging for Brittanee. She began to feel pressure from her peers and society as a whole. During her teenage years, she faced self-esteem issues and sought ways to express herself. Brittanee started writing poetry and keeping a journal where she described her feelings and experiences. These writings helped her cope with emotional storms and find answers to complex questions. In 2008, Brittanee was diagnosed with chronic depressive syndrome. This became another challenge for her and her family. However, Brittanee did not give up and continued to fight. She attended therapy, took medication, and tried to find the positive aspects of life. Sports and her interest in fashion helped her distract herself from dark thoughts and find joy in everyday activities. A year later, in April 2009, Brittanee and her friends planned to spend their spring break in the resort town of Myrtle Beach, located in South Carolina. This place was famous for its beaches, nightclubs, and carefree atmosphere, making it attractive to teenagers seeking adventure and fun. However, Brittanee's mother was extremely negative about this idea. At that time, Brittanee was only 17 years old, and Myrtle Beach was more than 1,000 kilometers away from their home in Chile. All her friends were also teenagers, and none of the adults were planning to accompany them on this trip. Brittanee's mother, intuitively sensing danger, immediately felt anxious about this trip. She believed her daughter could be in serious danger, and this premonition haunted her. She imagined various scenarios, from accidents to crimes that could happen to such a vulnerable and defenseless group of young people. In the end, after much contemplation and endless worries, she forbade Brittanee from going to Myrtle Beach. This decision greatly upset Brittanee, who had already dreamed of carefree days on the beach with her friends. A serious conflict erupted between her and her mother, leading to prolonged arguments. Brittanee did not understand why her mother did not trust her and did not let her feel grown up and independent. Disappointed and hurt, Brittanee barely spoke to her mother for several days. She felt unfairly deprived and denied the chance to enjoy a well-deserved vacation. Her friends were also disappointed, but unlike Brittanee, they did not face such strict prohibitions from their parents. Despite the prohibition, Brittanee could not stop thinking about the trip. She tried to find a way to convince her mother to change her decision, promising to be careful and responsible. However, her mother's anxiety and worry proved stronger than any arguments. On April 22, Brittanee told her mother she wanted to visit a friend who owned a house on the shore of a local lake. She explained that she planned to spend a few days there to relax and gather her thoughts after the intense arguments. Her mother did not object, as the lake was nearby their city, and such a trip seemed safe. Relieved by the proximity and the lack of serious risks, she let her daughter go. In reality, Brittanee decided to go to Myrtle Beach with her friends, without telling her mother. She was confident her mother was overestimating the potential dangers and that nothing bad would happen to her. Excited about the upcoming adventures and freedom, Brittanee and her friends met up that same day and set off for Myrtle Beach by car. The journey was long but fun. The girls chatted, laughed, and sang songs, enjoying every minute of their spontaneous trip. Brittanee imagined warm beaches, night lights, and unforgettable moments awaiting them. Myrtle Beach welcomed them with the sound of waves and the glow of evening lights. The city was buzzing with its resort life, full of tourists and entertainment. Brittanee was thrilled, everything she had dreamed of was right in front of her. They settled in a rented house near the beach, which became their temporary refuge for the vacation. Meanwhile, Brittanee's mother suspected nothing. She believed her daughter was relaxing at her friend's lake house, enjoying quiet days away from the city hustle. Her mind was at ease, and she couldn't imagine Brittanee had dared to defy her prohibition. Brittanee and her friends enjoyed every moment in Myrtle Beach. They spent days on the beach, swimming and sunbathing, and evenings in clubs and walking along the promenade. For Brittanee, it was real freedom, a chance to feel grown up and independent. However, a shadow of anxiety remained in her soul. She knew she had deceived her mother and feared the truth might come out. On April 25, feeling it was time to return home, Brittanee decided to call her mother and inform her of her imminent return. She did this when her friends were still sleeping after another fun night. When her mother answered, Brittanee tried to sound as calm and confident as possible. She said she had a good time at her friends and planned to return home the next day. Her mother was glad to hear Brittanee was well and sighed with relief upon hearing her daughter would soon be back. They talked a bit about their plans for the coming days, household chores, and how much the family missed Brittanee. The conversation was warm and heartfelt, further intensifying the girl's sense of guilt. After the call, Brittanee returned to her friends and began packing. Despite the happy memories, she wanted to return home quickly and tell her mother everything, hoping for her understanding and forgiveness. She knew that the main thing was to be honest and open, and now she was ready for this step. At 8 in the evening, as the sun began to set, Brittanee decided to walk to the hotel where an old friend from Rochester was staying. The hotel was located on the beachfront, just 2.5 kilometers from her current location. Almost immediately after Brittanee arrived at her friend's hotel, her friend texted her. Earlier, they had agreed that Brittanee would borrow shorts from her for the evening. However, now her friend demanded them back, as she planned to wear them to a party. Brittanee felt irritated and puzzled. She was already wearing the shorts, and now she had to go back to her hotel to return them. Annoyed, she left her friend's hotel and started back along the familiar route. On the way, Brittanee was texting with her boyfriend, John, who couldn't join them on the trip due to work. She told him about the unfortunate situation with the shorts and expressed her disappointment with the evening, which had promised to be so wonderful. At some point, Brittanee suddenly stopped responding to John's messages, which gave him a strange feeling of anxiety. He started sending her messages one after another, trying to find out what was happening, but each time received only silence in response. The feeling of uncertainty grew with every minute, until finally, John decided to call her. However, the calls went unanswered. Brittanee did not pick up. John then turned to her friends, hoping to get some information. They told him that Brittanee still hadn't returned and was also not responding to their messages. This news shocked John even more because her friends confirmed that this behavior was unlike Brittanee. She was usually responsible and stayed in touch. The alarming uncertainty and lack of any traces or explanations made John start considering various scenarios. He began worrying about what might have happened to Brittanee and what steps he should take to ensure her safety. Every minute without an answer increased his sense of worry and growing anxiety for his beloved. John kept trying to contact Brittanee, sending her several messages, but each time they went unanswered. He found it strange that she wasn't responding and began to feel a mix of hurt and anxiety. Finally, John took one last step and warned her that if she didn't respond, he would inform her mother about everything. But even this didn't elicit a response from Brittanee, making John realize that something serious might have happened. John decided to call Brittanee's mother and tell her that her daughter had disappeared. The woman was shocked and immediately contacted the police. She herself went to Myrtle Beach to help in the search for her daughter, as did her ex-husband. The police began coordinating a search operation only the next morning. Through conversations with Brittanee's friends, they established that she had left her room around 8 p.m. Hotel cameras recorded her at 8:30 p.m. when she was at her friend's hotel. Another camera showed that Brittanee was leaving the hotel at 8:48 p.m. These timestamps became key in the investigation and gave hope that the police would quickly uncover what had happened to Brittanee and bring her home. The police made attempts to find other cameras along the route from the hotel to the place where Brittanee was last seen, but all their efforts were fruitless. The lead investigators also questioned Brittanee's friend, whom she had visited before disappearing. He explained that they had been watching a baseball game with friends that evening, and by the end of the game, Brittanee had joined them. About 15 minutes later, she suddenly said she needed to return to her hotel because of her friend's request to return the shorts. The friend also mentioned that he had offered to drive her, especially considering it was dark, but Brittanee insisted on walking. The police concluded that these young people were likely not involved in her disappearance based on the available data. Surveillance footage showed Brittanee leaving the hotel alone, and none of her companions followed her. The investigators searched her hotel room and found that most of her personal belongings were still there. That evening, she had taken only her purse and phone with her. These details further deepened the mystery of Brittanee's disappearance, leaving the police with little information about what had happened to the girl after she left the hotel. Every minute was crucial in the search for answers and solving this mystery. All circumstances suggested that Brittanee's disappearance was not a spontaneous act. Her last conversation with her boyfriend just minutes before disappearing cast doubt on the possibility that she had left on her own. In that conversation, she expressed her dissatisfaction with her friends and made it clear her plans for the immediate future, to return to the hotel the next morning and simply go to sleep, with no intention of going out afterward. The police efforts were focused on reconstructing the timeline of the evening's events. They found that Brittanee left her friend's hotel at 8:48 p.m., and the last message to her boyfriend was sent at 9:15 p.m. This meant that she had almost reached her hotel and disappeared just minutes before she was expected to return. On the street, the police found a surveillance camera located a few hundred meters from Brittanee's hotel. They carefully reviewed the footage but didn't see Brittanee, which further complicated the investigation and deepened the mystery. Brittanee disappeared near a street surveillance camera, which indicated the moment of her disappearance. Based on this, the police requested data on her phone's connections to cell towers. They were surprised to learn that the phone remained on until morning, and its last signal was recorded about 90 kilometers from Myrtle Beach near Highway 17. This information greatly alarmed the police, raising their concern about possible dangers. The area where Brittanee's phone last pinged was known for its swamps, populated with many alligators. Detectives feared that she might have been kidnapped, killed, and then disposed of by being thrown into one of these swamps. In response to this terrifying scenario, the police organized an extensive search operation in the area. They used helicopters for aerial surveys, ATVs to navigate the difficult terrain, and specially trained dogs to search for human traces. Despite all efforts, the search yielded no results, and no traces of the missing Brittanee were found. After 11 days of intensive searching, the police decided to temporarily suspend the operation. They realized that if Brittanee was still in the area where her phone last pinged, her chances of survival were diminishing with each passing day. While some volunteers searched for new clues and evidence in Myrtle Beach, the police began analyzing the strange behavior of Brittanee's friends who had come to the city with her. From the very beginning of the girl's disappearance, her friends displayed unusual evasiveness and avoided direct answers to questions. Moreover, shortly after the disappearance, they moved to another hotel, which appeared suspicious. Brittanee's mother, in her desperate attempts to find any answers, tried several times to contact her daughter's friends, but they ignored her calls and messages, which only heightened her anxiety and suspicions. All these circumstances seemed very suspicious, but detectives could not find any connections between Brittanee's friends and her disappearance. All of them were at the hotel at the time of her disappearance and actively communicated with her through messages and calls. The police concluded that they were unlikely to be involved in the case and excluded them from the list of suspects. In addition, investigators interviewed another friend of Brittanee, whom she had met a day before the disappearance. Initially, his behavior seemed strange, but there was no evidence indicating his involvement in the disappearance. Moreover, he voluntarily came to the police station as soon as he learned about the girl's disappearance, which also convinced the investigation of his innocence. Ultimately, he was also excluded from the list of suspects. In the following weeks, the case was actively discussed in the media, and the police released surveillance footage, hoping for public assistance in solving Brittanee's mysterious disappearance. Brittanee's parents actively participated in television programs, including major national shows, to draw attention to their daughter's disappearance. Their story became widely known thanks to an appearance on a program specializing in missing persons investigations. All these efforts generated a significant public response, but no tip or lead resulted in concrete findings in the search for Brittanee. At some point, investigators decided to focus on all men with a history of violent crimes living in the Myrtle Beach area. This phase of the investigation took considerable time but did not yield any new clues or evidence that could help identify a possible perpetrator. In December of the same year, 8 months after Brittanee's disappearance, detectives suddenly received a new lead. A pair of tourists camping near Georgetown accidentally stumbled upon a pair of women's glasses. They turned the find over to the police. An investigation determined that the glasses belonged to Brittanee. However, upon examination, no foreign DNA traces were found on them. Several more months passed without any new leads. Brittanee's mother decided to move closer to Myrtle Beach to personally monitor the progress of the search and be at the center of events. She hypothesized that her daughter might have fallen victim to a criminal group and been taken to another country. However, detectives considered this version unlikely. Meanwhile, the police continued their investigation, checking all possible leads and traces that could lead to finding Brittanee. Each day of the search was a trial for her family, especially for her mother, who did not lose hope. Her theory of abduction was based on news of similar cases in the region, giving her grounds to believe this version despite the detective's skepticism. In June of the following year, the case gained attention again, with a chance for a breakthrough. On a street in Myrtle Beach, a 20-year-old girl was going about her business when suddenly a van stopped next to her. Two men quickly jumped out, clearly intending to grab her. Despite the suddenness of the attack, the girl did not panic and managed to resist. She struck one of the attackers, taking advantage of the moment of confusion, and quickly escaped. After evading her pursuers, the girl immediately went to the police, detailing the incident. The police promptly responded to her report, starting a search for the van and the attackers. The description of the criminals and their vehicle was shared with patrol cars and detectives, who began scouring the area for clues. Investigators also checked surveillance cameras installed in the vicinity, hoping to obtain a video recording of the incident. This brave girl's actions not only saved her but also gave the police new hope for progress in a case that seemed to be at a standstill. Her quick and decisive actions became an important part of the investigation, bringing closer the resolution of other similar cases, including Brittanee's case. Detectives acted swiftly and soon arrested one of the attackers. He turned out to be 37-year-old Timothy Taylor. Given the similarities between this incident and Brittanee's disappearance, investigators immediately began checking his possible involvement in her case. For 5 months, the police meticulously examined all aspects of his life and activities, trying to find any evidence linking Taylor to the girl's disappearance. They interviewed witnesses, checked his alibi, and analyzed his past for connections to similar crimes. The police reviewed all available records and conducted numerous interrogations, trying to gather information that could shed light on his potential role in Brittanee's case. However, despite all efforts and time spent, detectives eventually concluded that Taylor was likely not involved in her disappearance. This result was disappointing for the investigators, who had hoped that Taylor's arrest would help advance the investigation. However, they continued to look for other possible leads and witnesses to finally solve Brittanee's case and bring her home. In the following years, the police continued to work tirelessly on the case, checking every new lead. One such lead was information about a possible suspect whose apartment underwent a thorough search. Investigators hoped to find evidence in his residence that could shed light on Brittanee's disappearance. However, after a painstaking search, no significant evidence was found. Another promising lead was a report from a fisherman who claimed to have seen something suspicious on an island near the river. The police immediately went to the indicated location, organizing a thorough search of the area. The operation involved not only officers but also specialized teams with search dogs and divers to inspect the coastal zone. Despite all efforts and resources spent, this search operation also yielded no results. Each time a new check proved unsuccessful, it was a heavy blow for everyone involved in the case. Nevertheless, the police did not intend to give up. They continued to analyze new data, hoping that sooner or later they would find the thread leading to the solution of Brittanee's disappearance. Even despite the lack of significant breakthroughs, the investigators remained determined and persistently continued their search. In 2014, the police made an important discovery. Near the location where Brittanee's phone signal was last recorded, human remains were found. The discovery of the skeleton immediately raised suspicions that it might be the remains of the missing girl. Detectives began a thorough investigation and conducted the necessary examinations to confirm this version. However, the results showed that the skeleton belonged to a man, not Brittanee. This was a significant disappointment for everyone who had hoped for progress in the case. 2 years later, in 2016, the Federal Bureau of Investigation made a public statement that sounded like a bolt from the blue. The agency reported that the chances of finding Brittanee alive were extremely low. According to their version, the girl was kidnapped and taken to the location where her phone signal was last recorded, after which she was killed. This statement was a heavy blow for Brittanee's family and friends, but the FBI continued to attempt to find the truth and bring those responsible to justice. To stimulate the investigation process and attract new witnesses, the FBI offered a reward of $25,000 for any information that could help solve the case. The agency hoped that the generous reward would encourage people who might know something important to come forward and share their information. Meanwhile, despite the grim predictions, Brittanee's family continued to believe and hope for a miracle. Several months later, an unexpected twist occurred in the case, intriguing all the investigators involved. Remember Timothy Taylor, who attempted to abduct a 20-year-old girl in 2010? This time, detectives' attention turned to his son, 26-year-old Deshaun Taylor. It all began when an FBI informant serving time in one of South Carolina's prisons decided to share important information with the authorities. This informant, cooperating with the FBI, recounted an incident that happened to him before his arrest. He claimed to have information that could help in the investigation of Brittanee's disappearance. According to the informant, he knew Deshaun and had contact with him before his incarceration. The informant alleged that Deshaun might have been involved in Brittanee's disappearance. Detectives, who had almost given up hope of finding new evidence, received this information with interest and decided to verify its accuracy. Deshaun Taylor became the new suspect in this complicated case. Investigators began to thoroughly check his alibi, connections, and possible motives. They interviewed everyone who might know Deshaun and looked for any evidence that could confirm or refute the informant's version. This new turn offered hope that Brittanee's case might be solved. Every day, the investigation brought them closer to the truth, despite numerous difficulties and disappointments. The police were determined not to give up and hoped that the information would finally help them find answers to the questions that had tormented everyone for all these years. According to the informant, on April 27, 2009, he went to a cabin in the woods where his acquaintances, involved in various illegal activities, regularly gathered. His task was to deliver money to Timothy Taylor. However, instead of the usual meeting, he witnessed a horrifying scene. In one of the rooms, he saw Deshaun Taylor, along with 11 other men, assaulting a girl. The informant was stunned. At one point, the girl tried to escape, running to the door, but Deshaun pulled out a weapon and forced her back. Not wanting to become the next target, the informant left the room. A while later, he heard 2 gunshots and then saw a wrapped body being carried out of the house. Upon returning home, he saw a news report about Brittanee's disappearance and realized that the girl he had seen in the cabin was Brittanee. For investigators, this story was sensational, especially when another informant confirmed the first one's account. The second informant said that Deshaun had indeed abducted Brittanee and brought her to that cabin, where she was mistreated. According to him, Deshaun planned to sell the girl to one of his acquaintances. However, when the case gained wide publicity, he got scared and decided to get rid of the hostage to avoid capture. The informants claimed that Brittanee was killed 2 days after her abduction, which coincided with the main version of the detectives. Additional confirmation came from the location of Deshaun's father's house, which was in the same area where Brittanee's phone signal was last recorded. These testimonies provided new directions for the investigation and strengthened the version of Deshaun Taylor's involvement in Brittanee's abduction and murder. However, the police faced a serious problem: there was a complete lack of physical evidence. The informant's testimonies, although consistent, were not sufficient grounds for a conviction, especially considering that both witnesses were hardened criminals with dubious reputations. Understanding this, detectives decided to approach the case from another angle and arrest Deshaun on a different charge. In 2011, Deshaun Taylor was involved in a McDonald's robbery. He acted as the getaway driver, helping his accomplices escape the scene. This incident provided the police with an opportunity to arrest Deshaun and begin undercover investigations under the guise of another case. Deshaun was arrested for his involvement in the robbery, allowing investigators to conduct interrogations and gather additional evidence without arousing his suspicion about the real purpose of the investigation. At the same time, police continued to search for evidence linking Deshawn to Brittanee's disappearance. They checked all possible connections and contacts, analyzed phone records and movements, and conducted repeated witness interviews. Investigators hoped this step would allow them to find new evidence or make Deshawn confess to the crime. Simultaneously, they worked on strengthening the case against Deshawn on the robbery charge, ensuring he remained in custody as long as possible. This approach gave the police more time to investigate and find concrete evidence that could shed light on Brittanee's fate and confirm the version of her abduction and murder by Deshawn Taylor. While attempting to escape after the robbery, the criminals crossed state lines, automatically making it a federal crime. At that time, Deshawn had only been convicted in his home state, allowing the FBI to step in. The FBI took advantage of this opportunity to arrest Deshawn, hoping that the pressure would help obtain information about Brittanee's disappearance. Deshawn's lawyer tried to contest this decision, arguing that his client had already served time for the robbery. However, the FBI managed to transfer the case to federal court, increasing the pressure on Deshawn. During interrogations conducted as part of the investigation into Brittanee's abduction, Deshawn steadfastly maintained that he had nothing to do with her disappearance. Nevertheless, the investigators were determined not to give up. They continued to gather additional evidence and carefully analyzed all aspects of the case, hoping to find inconsistencies in Deshawn's statements or uncover new clues. This arrest gave them the opportunity to continue the investigation and delve into details that might have previously gone unnoticed. In the summer of 2017, Deshawn agreed to undergo a polygraph test, as he was promised a reduced sentence for the robbery in exchange for cooperation. During this test, the polygraph operator recorded 2 reactions that seemed suspicious and likely false. Deshawn was asked 2 key questions: whether he had seen Brittanee after her disappearance and if he had any involvement in the case. Deshawn answered both questions negatively, claiming that he had no connection to the girl's disappearance. However, the polygraph operator noted that his responses appeared untruthful. Despite these results, polygraph tests are not admissible in court, meaning that the detectives could not use this data for prosecution. For investigators, this was a disappointing result. They had hoped that the polygraph test would shed light on Deshawn's involvement in Brittanee's case. However, despite the polygraph results, they did not have enough solid evidence to proceed with the accusation. In July 2019, the trial regarding Deshawn concluded, and he was sentenced to just under a year for his role in the robbery. As investigators pondered their next steps to confirm his guilt, an unexpected event occurred. In February, the first informant unexpectedly changed his story in a new interview. He claimed to have seen Brittanee 4 times after her disappearance and that she was killed a month later by a man named Nate. This statement confused the detectives and complicated the investigation. They began searching for this Nate, but all their efforts were unsuccessful. They could not find such a person. In the following years, police did not cease their investigation, tirelessly trying to solve the case. They continued to search for evidence that could link Deshawn to Brittanee's disappearance while also considering other possible versions and suspects. As you may recall, immediately after Brittanee's disappearance, detectives conducted meticulous work. They interviewed all men in the area who had previously been convicted of violent crimes. This resulted in a list of the most suspicious individuals who were given special attention. 10 years later, without significant breakthroughs in the investigation, detectives decided to review this list. They repeatedly revisited these individuals, hoping that new facts or testimonies might have emerged over the years to help progress the investigation. In the process of re-examining the suspect list, detectives used new technologies and investigative methods that were not available during the initial search. They conducted additional interrogations, verified alibis, and thoroughly examined both old and new evidence. Additionally, they sought possible witnesses who might remember something important but had not previously contacted the police. Every person from Brittanee's circle and every seemingly insignificant event from that night were subject to detailed analysis. The police also collaborated with federal agencies and other law enforcement bodies to cross-reference data and find possible connections with other similar cases. They left no lead unchecked, understanding that even the smallest detail could be the key to solving the mystery. Simultaneously, they continued to explore theories related to Brittanee's abduction by an organized criminal group, considering her mother's opinion, although detectives deemed this less likely. They checked databases for international activity and tried to determine if Brittanee had been taken abroad. All these efforts were aimed at finding answers and finally achieving justice for Brittanee and her family, despite the passing years. Among the suspects, one person drew particular attention and topped the list: Raymond Moody. Although there was no direct evidence against him, his past left detectives uneasy. Raymond Moody had spent 21 years in prison for sexually assaulting 7 girls. His victims ranged in age from 5 to 17 years. Despite his crimes, Moody had 3 children of his own. After divorcing his wife, he moved and started a new relationship, leaving his past family behind. In 2011, Moody came under suspicion in Brittanee's case, and his apartment was searched, but no evidence related to the girl's disappearance was found. Despite this, the police could not ignore his past and his possible involvement. Moody led a fairly reclusive life after being released from prison. He worked sporadically and tried not to attract attention. Neighbors described him as a quiet and withdrawn person who rarely interacted with others. In his environment, he had no close friends and avoided discussing his past. In 2021, an FBI team decided to once again try to determine if Raymond Moody was involved in Brittanee's abduction. This time, they decided to take a different approach. Raymond had a girlfriend he had been dating for over 10 years. When he was questioned in the first weeks after Brittanee's disappearance, Moody claimed he had not been in Myrtle Beach that weekend. However, the FBI uncovered his lie. They discovered that on April 26, a day after Brittanee's disappearance, Raymond had been stopped by a highway patrol officer and fined for speeding. Moreover, his girlfriend confirmed that they had indeed been in Myrtle Beach during those days. This not only destroyed his alibi but also indicated that Moody had deliberately lied to the police. The FBI began a thorough review of all circumstances related to Raymond. They searched his home again, using modern methods and technologies that were not available in 2011. They examined his phone calls and messages, trying to find any leads. Moody's girlfriend was called in for questioning. She detailed those days when they were in Myrtle Beach. According to her, they had gone there without prior planning, and Raymond behaved nervously and strangely. She also recalled that Moody had left the motel several times late at night, and she didn't know where he went. The FBI also analyzed Raymond's financial transactions during those days. It turned out that he had withdrawn a large sum of cash just a few days before Brittanee's disappearance, which seemed suspicious. All these new clues allowed the FBI to bring more serious charges against him. Moody was again detained for questioning, and this time the investigators hoped he would not be able to evade the truth. The investigation took a new turn, and detectives hoped to finally solve Brittanee's case and find those responsible for her disappearance. Another interesting fact is that police questioned Raymond's girlfriend back in 2011. At that time, she admitted that she did not rule out his involvement in Brittanee's abduction, given his criminal past. In April 2022, she was called in for questioning again, and this time events took an unexpected turn. When investigators began asking about the days related to Brittanee's disappearance, the woman started behaving nervously and strangely, trying to leave several times, avoiding answers. However, detectives convinced her to stay and tell everything she remembered. At first, she didn't want to talk, but then, under the pressure of new evidence, she recalled an important detail. She said that the day after Brittanee's disappearance, Raymond came home with scratches on his face. She asked him about the origin of these marks, but he avoided answering, saying something vague about a random fight. This information immediately caught the investigators' attention. They began asking more detailed questions about Raymond's behavior during those days. The woman also mentioned that he was unusually irritable and anxious, which was uncharacteristic for him. Investigators decided to delve deeper into this new testimony. They checked medical records and found that Raymond had sought medical help around the same time the scratches were made. The doctor could not provide detailed information but confirmed that Moody had fresh injuries on his face. Thus, the reinterrogation of Raymond's girlfriend in 2022 opened new prospects in the investigation. The scratches on Moody's face, his nervousness, and evasive answers became key elements that could shed light on the events of those days and help solve Brittanee's disappearance. Regarding the day of the disappearance, the woman told detectives that Raymond asked her to temporarily switch cars. He took her large pickup truck and left her his car. This fact immediately interested the investigators and led to an unexpected turn in the case. After her account, detectives decided to use modern technology to track her phone's movements that evening. They discovered that the woman's phone was in the area of Brittanee's presumed abduction. This was the first significant breakthrough. Moreover, records showed that her credit card was used that evening near the abduction site. These new facts led detectives to a disturbing conclusion: the woman might have been in the car with Raymond when he abducted Brittanee. During interrogation, she categorically denied this version, claiming that she was not with Raymond that evening. She suggested that she had left her phone and bank card in the car, which could explain their location. Investigators began verifying this version. They interviewed her friends and acquaintances, trying to confirm her alibi for that evening. Some of them confirmed that she had mentioned plans to stay home. However, several neighbors noticed her car parked in an unusual spot, which raised their suspicions. Additionally, surveillance footage from the area of the presumed abduction was analyzed. One of the recordings showed a large pickup truck resembling the woman's vehicle, but the driver's face was not discernible. This added more questions. Soon, investigators focused on the woman's phone conversations and messages that evening. Analysis showed that she called Raymond several times, and their conversations lasted longer than usual. This led detectives to consider the possibility of coordinated actions between them. Meanwhile, the woman began to act even more nervously during interrogations, sometimes contradicting herself. She insisted that her actions were not suspicious and that she had simply left her things in the car by chance. She also mentioned that Raymond had suddenly left the house that night and returned half an hour later without explaining his behavior. Detectives were immediately interested in this detail and asked her to try to get Raymond to talk, even suggesting she wear a wire. However, after some discussion, they decided against this idea. Instead, for several days after this conversation, detectives set up surveillance around their home. They noticed that Raymond was behaving very strangely. He frequently left the house, searched the car, and appeared noticeably nervous. This behavior alarmed the investigators, and they decided to act. Obtaining a search warrant, detectives raided Raymond's house. During the search, they seized several mobile phones and other items of interest. They hoped to find evidence that could shed light on Brittanee's disappearance. Unfortunately, nothing usable in court was found. This was another disappointment for the investigators. Nevertheless, they did not lose hope and understood that they were close to solving the case. They decided to take a bold step. Using data on the woman's phone location and credit card transactions, they planned her arrest on suspicion of aiding in the abduction. Detectives were confident that this move could lead to uncovering the truth. The woman was shocked when she was arrested. During interrogation, she initially denied all accusations but gradually, under pressure from the evidence, began to open up. She recalled more details about Raymond's behavior during those days, spoke about his strange calls, and how he hid certain items in the garage. Detectives continued investigative actions to confirm her statements. They searched the garage and found hidden compartments with documents and Raymond's personal items that could be relevant to the case. They also reviewed surveillance footage, which showed that Raymond was indeed in the area of Brittanee's disappearance that evening. This turn in the investigation gave detectives new hope. They began to build a chain of evidence that could lead to charging Raymond with Brittanee's abduction. Investigators summoned Raymond for questioning and informed him of his girlfriend's arrest. Just a few minutes later, Raymond unexpectedly claimed that she had nothing to do with the abduction and confessed that he had killed Brittanee alone. This confession shocked the detectives, but they immediately felt that his version of events raised many questions. Raymond began to tell his version of events. According to him, he accidentally met Brittanee that night and offered her a ride. He claimed they had an argument, after which he allegedly assaulted her and, in a fit of rage, strangled her and hid her body in the woods. Detectives listened to his story cautiously, noting inconsistencies and contradictions. According to investigators, Raymond significantly distorted the real picture of events. They believed that everything happened quite differently. Most likely, Raymond abducted Brittanee from an empty street, took her to the river, where he assaulted and then killed her. Supporting this version was the fact that the girl suddenly stopped responding to her boyfriend's messages. Detectives noted that Brittanee did not respond even when her boyfriend threatened to tell her mother the truth, although, according to Raymond, she was still alive and with him in the car at that moment. Such behavior was extremely uncharacteristic for Brittanee, convincing investigators that Raymond was lying or omitting important details. Despite Raymond's confession, investigators knew they needed more evidence to confirm his guilt and hold him accountable. So when Raymond offered to take them to the place where he allegedly buried the body, the police immediately agreed. Raymond led them to a remote spot by the river, where he claimed to have hidden Brittanee's remains. The police thoroughly examined the indicated location and indeed found human remains there. Investigators began working with forensic experts to confirm that the discovered remains were indeed Brittanee's. DNA analysis and other procedures took several days, but the results confirmed the worst fears: it was indeed Brittanee. The discovery of the remains became crucial evidence in court. Prosecutors were able to build the case based on this and other collected evidence. Raymond was charged with Brittanee's abduction, rape, and murder. His girlfriend changed her testimony and claimed that everything happened as Raymond said. Detectives immediately realized that her new version was constructed to avoid punishment for complicity. However, their main priority was Raymond and his responsibility for the horrific crime. The fact that Raymond accurately pointed out the burial site of the victim left no doubt about his guilt. The trial was long and complicated, but in the end, justice prevailed. 13 years later, the man finally faced punishment for his deeds. On October 19, 2022, Raymond was sentenced to 30 years in prison. At the time of sentencing, he was 62 years old, so the chances of his release were nearly zero. In his final statement, Raymond admitted that he was indeed a monster and expressed regret for the suffering he caused Brittanee. Brittanee's family, despite the grief they experienced, finally got the answers to their questions. For them, it was a small consolation, knowing that the guilty party would face deserved punishment. This tragic event became a lesson for everyone involved in the investigation and a reminder of the importance of persistence and attention in the search for the truth, although some aspects still leave investigators pondering. For example, they still cannot explain why their two informants provided false information against Deshawn. Both of these individuals were hardened criminals, and their testimonies initially aroused skepticism. They might have used information from the news to frame Deshawn and get reduced sentences for helping the investigation. Another aspect that continues to trouble detectives is the suspicion that Raymond was involved in another crime, the disappearance of a 28-year-old woman in 2005. At that time, he lived near her, and investigators believe he might have been involved in her abduction. However, Raymond denies this, and there is no evidence against him. Therefore, he is unlikely to face additional charges in this case. Thus, despite the successful conclusion of one of the most high-profile cases in recent years, detectives still have unresolved questions. They continue to seek answers to fully uncover all the secrets associated with this criminal. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this investigation, don't forget to like, share your opinion in the comments, and subscribe to our channel.